Hi, welcome to my kitchen. I'm Elaine from Foodboard Sourdough, and in this video I'm going to show you how I make my sourdough using my master recipe. I'm also going to be showing you the Cotswold flours I use. In the first instance, I'm going to use the strong white bread flour because this is a great flour for starting off with sourdough. It works brilliantly with my recipe, so that's the one I'm going to use to start off with. And then at the end of the video, I'm going to talk to you about some of the other Cotswold flours and how to use them and integrate them into the recipe. So I hope you enjoy this. I hope you find it useful. There's lots of hints and tips available on my website, lots of information on the Cotswold flour website. So let's make some dough. Here we go, I'm going to make my dough. So I've got my bowl on the scales. I'm going to put that to 0. And the first thing I want is 50 grams of starter. So I fed my starter a few hours ago, so she's nice and active and bubbly. And all I use in my recipe is 50 grams of starter. Sometimes I use less. If it's very warm, then I use less starter to prevent the risk of overproving. So we've got 50 grams of starter in the bowl, and now we need. So I'm going to put it back to 0. Then I want 350 grams of water. So this is my standard master recipe. Works perfectly with this flour and 350 grams of water. I weigh the water just because the bowl is already on the scales and it just keeps it simple. So don't worry about what's on the spoon. Let's just give that a swish around and lift the starter from the bottom of the bowl. So back to 0 again. 500 grams of flour. And for me, just a teaspoon of salt for my tastes. Nothing special. This is pink Himalayan salt, but it doesn't need to be. If you want more salt, go for it. This is all I use in mine. So at this point, all I want to do is get the water through the flour. Just gently get it moving. If you're wondering, my bowl is 23 centimetres in diameter and 9 centimetres deep. It's a perfect size for assessing whether your dough is fully proved the next morning. So I just want to make sure that there's as little dry flour left as possible, but it doesn't have to be perfect at this point. I'm just going to go in with a scraper. I like to use a scraper. You can use your hands if you want to. Just make sure that everything is integrated. At this point, it really doesn't need to be super smooth or super mixed, just a rough mix, and we'll start working with it a bit later. So I like a nice clean bowl, so I like to go round and just clean it down because that's what makes me happy. So as you can see, just a rough mix, that's all it needs to be. And then I'm going to cover it with a shower cap and just let it sit. Just going to let it sit on the counter for an hour. It doesn't matter if that becomes an hour and a half or 2 hours, it doesn't matter. Just going to let it sit and settle before we start working with it. And then I will come back and show you the next stages. This dough has now been sitting for maybe just over an hour. It hasn't started to grow yet, and it doesn't need to. So there's now two choices of how you start to work with this. So you can, if you want, you can start off with a scraper. This is when the dough is at its most sticky. As you start to work with it, the stickiness moves on. So you can start like this and keep going all the way round like that until it comes into a ball. Or you can get in with your hands. So what I'm doing is I'm using my thumb and my forefingers and just picking and turning. Pick and fold. So we're lifting and folding, and what this is doing, this is starting to give the gluten a workout, and this is to build the structure into your dough. So it doesn't need to become a window pane, you don't need anything like that. Just up and over, and then this first occasion you may do this 20-25 times as you come round the bowl, because this is when it is sticky. After this, when the next few times you do it, it won't be anywhere near as sticky and it will come into a ball a lot faster. So all we want is for this to come into a ball. Look how lovely and smooth it gets. It doesn't need to, so don't worry if your dough doesn't look exactly like mine. It's okay, just give it the work. And all we want then is this nice ball of dough. So I've got another one here, just to show you again the action. Okay, bit of water on your fingers if you want to, don't do it too much because you're adding water to the dough every time you do that. So lift, up and over. And this is the same action that we'll use again later. So up and over every time. Tuck it in, turn the bowl. Up, over and turn. And you can see already the dough's becoming bouncy. It's getting smoother. Oh, it's a joy. I love it. So we put the shower caps on again, and then these doughs are just going to sit for another rest. You can leave it again for half an hour. Really, it doesn't have to be an exact time. So the intention is to do this 3 more times, just to build up the structure in the dough. I've got timetables on my website, so you can work it backwards, or work out the timings and how they'll work for you in your household. So there we go. Again, just going to cover it, shower cap again, and leave it on your counter. The dough has now been sitting for about 45 minutes, and as you can see, it's spread out again. It hasn't started to grow yet, and that's fine. It won't grow until overnight. Sourdough is a very slow moving beast, so you won't see any changes yet. So we just want to do the same thing again, exactly the same action, and as you'll see, it's already coming together faster. Cleaning the bowl as it goes and coming into a ball really quickly. So this is going to take a lot less actions. All we want to do is bring it into a nice bouncy ball and then stop. You don't need to keep going. It doesn't need to be any more work than that. Here we go. And that's it. So again, this dough is going to spread, and we will do this again 2 more times before leaving it overnight. Exactly the same actions. So I'll show you again on the other dough so that you can see. Up and over, up and over. Lovely, this flour is so nice to work with. And look how smooth it becomes. And this is it, this is the only action you need to do. So I've now shown you a couple of times that I've done it. Here we go. So as I said, cover them again, and then I'll do the same action 2 more times over the next hour or 2, and then leave it overnight to prove. Full step-by-step details for this are on my website, I promise. I'm just showing you the actions and the motion with this now. So let's cover them up. And the next time you see it, should be a lovely big bowl of dough. Here we have the dough. It's had an extra set of pulls and folds in between, so I'm just going to do the last one. And all I want to do here is just give it one final round. And it's all you need to do is just one final round. Just pull it back into a ball and then stop. And the dough will tell you when it's had enough, because you can't pull it into a ball anymore, basically. So, into its nice little ball. Going to cover it over and leave it on the counter overnight to prove. I do this for about 8 to 10 hours. I keep in mind the room temperature, because if it's going to be hot overnight, you need to make amendments at the beginning. There's full tips about that on my website. But this will sit on my counter now quite happily overnight. Then in the morning, we'll have a nice big bowl of dough to put into the banneton. So it's time to say goodnight. Here we are, the morning after, with our lovely big bowl of dough. Look at that. Delights me every time. So this has been proving on the counter for about 10 hours. Temperature overnight was between 18 and 20 degrees, absolutely perfect. So the size of these bowls is great to ascertain how the dough has grown. Alternatively, look for the dough to at least double. That is what you're aiming for. But to still have an element of firmness to it. You still want that structure. So the next step is to put this dough into your banneton. So if you're doing this in the morning before you go to work, this part literally can be 30 seconds. We pull the dough together using the same action again, put it into the banneton, cover it, put it into the fridge and bake later. So you can always do that, put it in the fridge, bake it when you get home from work. Or leave it in the fridge for a few hours and bake it if you're at home. So my banneton has already been prepared with water and rice flour. Use rice flour because it's not porous, there's no gluten in it, so it makes a really good layer, a good non-stick layer. And all I want to do is get that into there. But you want to add some tension to it. So even though there's already rice flour in my banneton, I'm just going to add a bit more. Because the last thing you want after all this effort is for your dough to stick to your banneton. It's going to go in with exactly the same action. Look at that. A lovely bouncy ball. Just want to be pulling it over and tucking it in. So you're creating a little bit of tension as you do it. This dough, you couldn't squash it if you tried because it's full of power. But you also don't want to. We're not knocking back here. You don't want to be crushing it too much, but you also don't want to tickle it. So you want to pull it together like a bit of a parcel. Give it just a bit of tension. Get it to the point where you feel comfortable that you can turn it out. So in your hand, turn the bowl over. Look at that beautiful ball of dough into your banneton. And it doesn't really stick that much by now. The odd bit, but it's not bad. And all I want to do is just make sure nowhere is sticking. So a little bit around the sides, a little bit over the top. And then going to put Shower cap back on and back into the fridge, and we'll bake it later. Happy baking. This dough has now been in the fridge for 5 hours. You can leave it for 6, 7, 10. You can leave it for a day if you want to. There is a finite amount of time you can leave it in the fridge because the dough will lose all of its integrity and it will spread when you turn it out. But if you leave it anything between 3 and 12 hours, it's going to be fine. So what I want to do now is turn this dough out into my pan for baking. So I use enamel roasters to bake mine in. Always bake in a lidded pan. You can use whatever lidded pan you've got as long as it's big enough. So the intention now is to get that into there, and then I'm going to score it. So first off, I always line my pans with parchment paper so they don't stick. I always reuse the paper time and again until it becomes crisp and unusable. So I'm going to put my hand underneath the banneton, paper over the banneton, pan over the top, and turn. Don't just turn your dough into the pan because it will slop and you'll hurt its shape. So here we go. Our nice, lovely dome of dough. So now I want to score it. So I'm using a lame, which is ostensibly a handle to hold your razor blade. It needs to be a razor blade because if you try and use a knife, they're rarely sharp enough or thin enough. And the intention with scoring it is you encourage your dough to grow as it bakes. But also by scoring into the middle, you encourage that growth and that shape. The way that you score dough can make quite a difference to the outcome of it. So here we go. I'm going to put the lid on and put it into the oven. So it's not very even, but it doesn't matter. You now have two choices. You can bake in a preheated oven at 240 fan, or you can do a cold start. And by that I mean I don't preheat the oven, I don't preheat the pan, everything goes in cold. So I'm going to put my lid on the pan, I'm going to put this into a cold oven and then turn the oven on and turn it up to 220 degrees centigrade, fan assisted, and turn the timer on for 55 minutes. So it's in there for 55 minutes from the moment I put it in the oven. So let's get it in there and see how it turns out. And this is when we pray the sourdough gods have done what we hope. Now that that's in the oven, all you need to do with your banneton is leave it on the side, let it dry out and put it back in the cupboard. You don't need to wash it or scrape it or anything like that. But don't store it covered in plastic because it will go mouldy. So that will go back in the cupboard. My shower cap will sit on my windowsill to dry out, and that can get used again as well. So here we go. So here it is. Let's see how it looks. Wow, look at that. There is our lovely baked loaf, made using our beautiful Cotswold flour. Look at that. So what I'm going to do now is carefully ease that from the pan and sit it onto the rack and allow it to cool. This is the most difficult bit because you really need to allow the loaf to cool for at least an hour. If you cut into it too soon, it will still be cooking. All that steam will fill the holes and you'll end up with a gummy loaf. So I actually leave mine overnight to cool. But the longer you can give it to cool, the better it will be. But look at that. There is our lovely loaf of bread. Just stare at it for a little while. So I hope that that has all been useful. And now I'm going to tell you about the other flours that you can use in it. For now, let's just enjoy. In case you'd like to see the whole shape, here it is. Now on its rack. Look at that. Lots of lovely texture. You might even be able to hear it crackling. This is our dough. This is our loaf singing. This is what we say when it's crackling. I thought you might like to see the loaf out of the pan so you can see the shape. And maybe you can hear the crackle. This is our loaf singing as it starts to contract after all that heat and coming into cooler air. It smells amazing. So there we go. Happy, happy sourdough baking. Hi, so I hope you enjoyed seeing how I make sourdough. So as a reminder, the flour that I used in this recipe was the strong white bread flour. So in the other flours in the range, it's really simple to start to play with them and mix them up. So an easy way to start playing around is to use 400 grams of the strong white bread flour and 100 grams of another flour so that you can start to see how it behaves. So you could use 8 grain flour, we've got strong wholemeal flour, we've got white spelt flour, Cotswold crunch flour, very nice, or wholemeal spelt flour. These would all work really nicely as a portion with the strong white bread flour. Or something I like to do is use Cotswold's crunch in its entirety. That makes a lovely loaf. When you first start mixing the dough, it's very sticky, and as you work with it, it smooths off. So keep going, the stickiness will pass and it makes a wonderful, wonderful loaf. Or, like I said, use a portion. Something else I like to do is use 250 grams of the wholemeal bread flour with 250 grams of the white spelt flour. So the white spelt is very light and fine, and it evens out the heaviness of the wholemeal flour, and it makes a really nice dough. It's really nice to work with, really nice and spongy. It's a really different feel from the strong white bread flour dough. But my tip would be, is play with them, chop and change and feel brave. Initially start with your strong white bread flour, then start to just bring in, say, 100 grams of a new flour, see how that feels and tastes, and then start to build it up from there. There's obviously more flours in the range that you can pick from. These are just a few I have to hand. But have fun. Sourdough is far more forgiving than people think. It's truly a joy to make, and once you get into the rhythm, it's easy to be making loaves on a consistent rota, week in, week out. I hope